Welcome back, everyone. It's your host, Danny Haiphong. It's great to be back. I am back from China. It's good to be here with all of you. We're going to get right started because we have a very big show today. We need to begin with Emmanuel Macron being publicly humiliated, not by another leader or on the world stage, but by his own wife slapping him on his presidential jet as it was traveling to Vietnam, the former French colony. The symbolism was devastating, but it perfectly mirrors more than just the humiliation of Macron, but the collapse of US and European foreign policy as a whole. Right now, the West is going off of the rails, with Donald Trump leading a new wave of threats against Russia and NATO lining up like obedient poodles. Long range weapons, more sanctions, tariffs, all forms of warfare back on the table against Russia. Meanwhile, the US backed genocide that is being bankrolled has been completely ignored as the world turns toward Russia's explosive response, a bold show of power from a rising multipolar world. Trump apparently is stunned. Time is running out for US hegemony as it continues to unravel. To break it all down, we have friend of the show, geopolitical analyst, journalist, Pepe Escobar. Pepe, really good to have you back on today.
Hi, Danny. Good to be with you. It's midnight in Thailand, Southeast Asia. Very, very important. My neighbors in the south, they are asleep now, but today's day one and tomorrow day two of the China ASEAN GCC Golden Triangle Summit.
Yeah, no, there's a lot going on in the world right now. Apologies, everyone. I think I fixed the audio issue. It wasn't synced up to the right microphone, but we should be all good to go now. All right, Pepe. Well, let's get started just to keep on time for you. I know it's late. Let's begin with what has been apparently the West gone mad, and I want to include the United States and Donald Trump in on this. Now, Donald Trump has unleashed a series of tweets. As you know, Pepe, Russia has been just absolutely pummeling and pounding Ukraine in response to the 300 plus drone attacks or attempted attacks per day shot down by Russian missile air defenses. But here was Donald Trump's first tweet that he put out, or Truth Social. I've always had a very good relationship with Putin of Russia, but something has happened to him. He's gone crazy. He's killing people needlessly. And we're not talking just about soldiers. Missiles and drones are being shot into cities in Ukraine for no reason whatsoever. I've always said he wants all of Ukraine, not just a piece of it. And I am being proven right. But if he does, it will lead to the downfall of Russia. He then followed this up with, there have been numerous reports of sanctions being mulled by Trump, more sanctions. Of course, we know Europe is completely on that. Lindsey Graham is writing op-eds in the Wall Street Journal about 500% tariffs through a Senate bill. But here is the latest Truth Social now. What Vladimir Putin doesn't realize is if it weren't for me, lots of really bad things would have already happened to Russia. And I mean really bad. He's playing with fire. Pepe, talk about what's going on here, because all of this is in response to Russia's apparent advances. It seems like Vladimir Putin and Russia have seized the initiative, and I'm curious on your thoughts on this reaction. Is the honeymoon over for Donald Trump's apparent, what the Western media has been claiming all along, a honeymoon phase between Russia or Putin and Trump?
Well, is there a honeymoon in his head? And with whom? Look, this is, makes you want to go to bed, really, because the level of stupidity now, it's off the charts. No contextualization, of course. The tweet where he says that Putin is crazy now is the new meme. Everything that happens from now on will be subordinated to this Putin is crazy meme. And this applies to the Trump administration, to the people against him, to the deep state, to the European chihuahuas, to the warmongers, etc. Everything that happens is because Putin is crazy. So we are back to where we were even before the SMO or the day the SMO was launched. At the time, everybody was saying, Putin is crazy. He's an animal. He's deranged. He's invading Europe. Now we're back to the same thing, like nothing happened for, 3 years and 3 months. It's pathetic, in fact. And obviously, neither Trump nor Trump 2.0 actors, much less anybody in the deep state, to contextualize to the President of the United States why the Russians are launching, still is not over, a devastating bombardment of selected targets all over Ukraine. In a matter of days, between 4 and 5, Ukraine launched more than 1,100 drones against civilian targets all across Russia and even against Moscow directly. So this compounds the attack of a swarm of drones against Putin's helicopter when he was going to Kursk. This is an attempted assassination of the president of the Russian Federation. It doesn't get more hardcore than that. So obviously, we have a response, and the response, considering what happened, was relatively measured. It will go on, of course. Of course, Trump never contextualizes anything. When you are in a Narcissus drowned world of your own, when you play all the characters in Alice in Wonderland, as a Chinese essay brilliantly depicted a few weeks ago, everything happens inside your head, literally. And then whatever you say goes because you're the ruler of the world, his own terminology. Once again, maybe tomorrow everything will change. Maybe tomorrow say, okay, I'm going to pick up the phone and call Putin again. But as it stands, we have this, once again, childish tantrum, which, for all practical purposes, buries any possibility of civilized dialogue between Washington and Moscow. Of course, from the Russian side, they are demonstrating once again infinite Taoist patience. Peskov said, no, the situation is complicated. It's very emotional. We appreciate the President of the United States' efforts to find a solution, etc. But the circles of power in Moscow are getting fed up with this whole charade. Once again, another kabuki. So, from now on, the response will continue. There are no illusions that this ceasefire kabuki will go anywhere. First of all, because Trump doesn't know where is it going. He doesn't have a strategy. He doesn't even have tactics. He's praying for a sort of Hail Mary pass that will give him the so-called ceasefire and the solution. It's not going to happen. Putin, on the last phone call, explained in detail to him, nothing will happen if we don't address the root causes of the conflict. The President of the United States cannot address the root causes of the conflict because that will implicate two things. One, he goes against the whole deep state and the whole collective West policy against Russia, not only for the past 30-something years, but for the past 10 years and even before. And two, if he does that, he will have to recognize tacitly in front of the whole planet the strategic defeat of the empire of chaos and all the chihuahuas against Russia. So nothing's going to happen. So at least I would say that the kabuki now, it's naked. Everybody can see it for what it is. There won't be any ceasefire. There won't be any negotiations going very, very deep into the origin of this whole tragedy. And what Lavrov, for the past few months, started to say openly, this will be solved in the battlefield, is not only what Putin and the Security Council think and the Minister of Foreign Relations, but the majority of the Russian population now wants. Okay, let's go all the way. All right. And what Medvedev basically, of course, it was lots of sense of humor, of course, that tweet where he basically says, well, if things go on like this, the buffer zone in Ukraine, and when you look at the map, it's like 99% of present-day Ukraine before rump Ukraine in the future. So that's where we're going. This means there will be no end to this war in 2025. That's for sure. And maybe not even in 2026. This will go on. It will be horrible. It will be what we experienced these past few months, accelerated, and more the Russians are going to start devastating what's left of Iranian infrastructure, of Ukrainian infrastructure. Sorry, I still have Iran in my mind because I came back from Iran last week. So this is where we are, Danny, and all of you in the audience. It's grim, to say the least.
Yeah, well, actually, you mentioned that tweet by Medvedev, and here it is. He posted a map of the buffer zone that essentially is the entirety of Ukraine, with just a tiny sliver bordering Poland.
Yeah, but that sliver is bordering Poland, so the sliver is going to disappear as well.
Yes, exactly. So talk about the freak out, though, because the Western mainstream media has been posting for days and days on end about Russia. As you said, this will be solved on the battlefield. Well, Russia has been launching just intense drone attacks, missile strikes on Ukraine. Talk about this freak out, because it's what Donald Trump is essentially referring to. And it's what now has, of course, Germany, now the UK, France, and Germany has said, Mr. Merz, the new chancellor, has said that the United States is in on the long-range weapons now, too, being lifted any restrictions. So talk about this freak out. What is Russia doing, and what does it all mean?
Well, I have much better picture of what's really going on in the high circles of power. I'm going to Russia in 2 days. I'm back in Russia in 2 days. So I've been doing a BRICS tour, in fact. Started in China, went to Iran, then 3 days in Russia for Victory Day, and now I'm back in Russia, and I'll spend the months of June in Russia. So I have a much better picture of how hardcore the situation is going to be in the next few weeks and in the next few months, going deep into summer. It does not look good. And people are severely angry by this assassination attempt against Putin directly. Coming from the Kremlin so far, it's been very modulated, calculated, discreet, in fact, but they are sitting, of course, because they know that wherever that came from, did Trump know about the intel that facilitated this drone attack, the swarm of drones attacks against a presidential helicopter? Was he forced on it after the fact? Did he know after the fact? How much the Americans, well, the Americans obviously supplied all the intel to Kiev, of course. So the Russians are putting all this puzzle together. And when they have answers, then we're going to start to have an even more hardcore response. There's no question about that. But once again, it's grim because any possibility that we might have had of a civilized dialogue starting at least to address, if not the root causes, but at least some of it or something around the root causes. And then, of course, assuming there would be some sort of settlement, and Trump would have to admit that the settlement, people are winning a war, they declare how the war is going to be finished. Losers never finish wars. This is completely absurd. And Trump and the empire, they are on the losing side. So at least we were until what, a week ago or so, maybe we were heading towards at least a little more dialogue, a little more conversation, to quote Elvis, on the table. Now, even that has vanished. Lavrov is trying to put a brave face on it. Okay, we're probably going to meet again, not in the Vatican, of course, which is completely absurd. The Catholic Church deciding the fate of two Christian Orthodox nations. That's beyond, that doesn't even qualify as a joke. But now, even with Lavrov saying, okay, maybe we're going to meet again in Istanbul, but on what terms? Especially if the Russians put back together everything that happened leading to this drone attack against the presidential helicopter.
Yeah, and the Western media has been responding to what Russia is doing with regard to these massive strikes over the last several days, saying, hell is being rained on Ukraine, but very little mention of exactly what you just talked about, that Vladimir Putin himself was being targeted, Pepe. He was being targeted. There was a massive drone attack on the presidential helicopter as it was flying from Kursk. It's absolutely stunning. But I think it alludes to exactly what you were referencing earlier, that what we are seeing is the losing side trying to now scramble for whatever is left. It's almost like there's this sudden realization that this won't be settled at the negotiating table, and they're trying to pin all their blame onto Russia again.
Of course, and that's we come back to the top meme from now on, ad infinitum. Putin is crazy. So there cannot be any solution for Ukraine because Putin is crazy. It's a circular argument, and that's it. This is their plan B, in fact. And when I say they, it's the whole gang, from Trump administration and people around Trump, part of Trump 2.0, to deep state, to all the chihuahuas and warmongers in Europe. Everybody, the whole fragmented collective West. This is their plan B, and now it's in the open.
Yeah, definitely out in the open. And then final comment on this, Pepe. What is the significance for you with regard to the long-range weapons? This once again, it feels like now we have Germany in the lead, but the German Chancellor Merz said that the United States is also involved in this. There's so many conflicting reports. On the one hand, you'll hear that Trump is not considering increased sanctions, is very hesitant on utilizing any kind of long-range weapons, Ukraine utilizing any long-range weapons against Russia. And then on the other, you'll see this, Merz saying that the United States, UK, France are all ready to green light long-range weapons use from Ukraine again. Deja vu. What do you make of this the circus right now that is just becoming more and more apparent?
In fact, you just defined it, another circus, because this decision has been made months ago, even before a BlackRock chancellor was elected. Everybody knew that this had been decided. They're just waiting for the right moment to announce it. And now he is announcing as chancellor. Everybody knows that. The Russians already knew it. So of course, sooner or later, we're going to have Taurus coming in, and we're ready for them. We're already prepared to face Taurus. So it's not going to change anything in the battlefield. It will change in terms of what sort of response we're going to have from the Russian side when the first Taurus start to hit civilian targets deep into the Russian Federation. Then we're going to have some real rock and roll. Oh, yeah. There's no question about that. But for the moment, only speculation. And if the Americans are in on it, of course they are. And they are still, don't forget that the previous batches, they're still supplying weapons to Ukraine. Nothing has changed. There's no new batch, but the old batches still keep coming. So nothing essentially has changed in the battlefield, apart, of course, from the steady Russian advance. At the same time, these drone swarms launched by Ukraine, it's an enormous problem for Russia. It's very, very serious. And I'm waiting to see how deep we can have this conversation in Moscow, because it's still a taboo. These drone swarms, they disturb tremendously air traffic, civilian air traffic in several Russian regions, including the airports around Moscow. Vnukovo, Domodedovo, now it's back and forth, no planes taking, it's very complicated. And of course, the Russian internet, because they cut off internet immediately. And people are starting to get really, really pissed about it. Average Russian citizens, So this Ukrainian Kiev strategy, very cheap, is very, very disturbing. And for the moment, the Russians have not found a way to counteract it. So this will be one of the key topics of conversation in Russia for the next few weeks, in fact. In parallel, of course, with geoeconomics, there's going to be the St. Petersburg Forum, which will be very, very important in terms of how it's going to connect to the BRICS later, early in July in Rio, how it's going to connect to the current forum here today and tomorrow in Kuala Lumpur, where we have the Golden Triangle, how they are defined here in Asia, sitting on the same table. And this is immense. We still don't know. I'm waiting for their final declaration, which is coming only tomorrow, late afternoon here, Asia time, Southeast Asia time. But we're going to have the GCC, the 6 ones, including the 3 that lavished zillions of dollars on Trump, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar. ASEAN 10, their number 1 partner, trade partner is China, and China on the same table, discussing lineaments of the future multinodal, multipolar world with a joint declaration focused on several areas, including trade in their own currencies. And this is going to overlap with BRICS in a little over a month from now. So don't forget that many of these who are in Kuala Lumpur today and tomorrow, they're going to be at the table at BRICS in Rio as well, as full members and as partners. So this, the first part of our conversation was so grim. I hope now we're starting the second part, we can talk about the auspicious aspects, geoeconomic aspects, in terms of connectivity, in terms of the BRICS lab, everything there, they continue to test in terms of settlements, payment settlements, a new currency, not yet, but new forms of payment, digital currency, you name it, So what happens in Kuala Lumpur is directly linked to what's going to happen in Rio. And in between, we're going to have an absolutely irrelevant summit, the NATO summit in 2025 of June, which won't decide anything. They will go for their plan B. Putin is crazy, so we have to continue the war. This is the advanced headline of the NATO summit, which is going to be in the Netherlands, by the way, hosted by that piece of Gouda. There you go.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think this is a good place actually to transition to this multinodal world, Pepe, because there, as you said, there is a lot going on. I wanted to pull up something that you observed as well. So you're talking about that major summit that China, ASEAN, I know the GCC. It's a huge summit. Then there's also this that didn't get much attention. The China Iran corridor is now in operation. First freight train from China arrived in Iran in 15 days compared to 40 by sea. Iran can now export oil to China through this corridor, and Chinese goods can also go to Europe unhindered by the U.S. Navy. Now, Pepe, I know that there's also a huge security conference participated by Russia, China at the moment. Just talk about all of these moves then, give an idea of, okay, what's the significance of this corridor for Russia, for China, Iran, and of course, Russia is not far behind in the development of this multipolar world. It is kind of exploding quietly in the background, as I think that a lot of these threats from Trump, from the United States, from Europe, I think there's a realization that this is accelerating at a breakneck speed. So talk about these developments, especially this quarter.
And there's nothing they can do, and there's nothing they can offer as an alternative. Well, I've been writing about all this for years, in fact. In fact, since the beginning of the New Silk Roads, 12 years ago. This particular direct freight train from Xi'an, I love it. I love the heavy historical overtones. This is a graphic illustration of the 21st century New Silk Road. Starts in Xi'an, which was the start of the ancient Silk Road in China. And it goes to Persia. And China and Persia, throughout the different phases of the ancient Silk Roads, they were always trading. So it's beautiful. It, from Xi'an, traverses Guangzhou province, the whole of Xinjiang, gets to the border with Kazakhstan, which is the dry port of Korgos. I visited a few years ago. It's three different
I have
layers.
also been. I went last year. It was amazing.
It's fantastic because you have cargo, you have buses, you have trucks, pedestrians, different terminals for everybody at Korgos. Fascinating. And then it crosses to Kyrgyzstan, from Kyrgyzstan to Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, I'm sorry, to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and then Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan and Iran, they they have oil swaps and gas swaps, especially a lot, arriving in Tehran. And all that in 20 days, direct. So from now on, let's say starting from probably next year, with upgrading of the railways, we're going to have a swarm of cargo from China and back, China, Persia, China, via this branch of what the Chinese call the middle corridor. This is one of the branches of the middle corridor. There are several middle corridors going mostly from Xinjiang to Kazakhstan, and then they branch out. There are different ways to get to Iran and then to Turkey. So this is very, very important because it complements Belt and Road projects across Asia. It's a fundamental branch of the New Silk Roads in terms of railways. It can be upgraded in the future to high speed. Certainly, this is something that will happen in the next few years. And progresses in parallel to what I was doing when I was in Iran until a week ago, a week and a half ago. I was following the other key connectivity corridor from north to south. I tracked the north-south transportation corridor all across Iran, from the Caspian to the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman, including the central highway that goes through Qom and Isfahan. I talked about this in other podcasts as well, and I did 3 different columns about it. One published on Sputnik, was translated in US, several media. A longer version that I put on my VK account, and a third version that I did for the Chinese, which is going to be published by Guancha in China. So it's great because this investigation on the north-south transportation inside Iran is going to be turned into a documentary. So this is going to be the first, probably the first documentary in the world explaining how the international north-south transportation corridor works. And because it's in Iran, which is central to all that, then you can extrapolate to how it will come from St. Petersburg all the way to Astrakhan, the Caspian port, north of the Caspian, on the Russian side, and then from Bandar Abbas and Chabahar in the south, Persian Gulf and Sea of Oman, going all the way to Mumbai. And when we put this all together, we have this north-south corridor, and we have these east-to-west corridors, including the freight train from Siam to Persia. That's it. This is the reality that is being implemented at breakneck speed all across Eurasia. And it's connected to what they are discussing in Kuala Lumpur today and tomorrow, with China, with the ASEAN 10, linked by several Belt and Road projects, including, for instance, two examples: the Jakarta to Bandung high-speed rail, built by the Chinese, and the Yunnan province, Laos, a high-speed rail, built by the Chinese as well. This is going to go all over Southeast Asia as well. And obviously the Gulf, they're looking at all these projects and say, look, we want to be part of them as well. We want to invest, we want to do more trade with you and more trade in our currencies, which brings us to BRICS. So all this connectivity, north, south, east, west, Southeast Asia, West Asia, different layers of corridors, all together discussed on the table with practical projects and all leading to BRICS. So this will be also part of the BRICS discussion in July. Even if there are no breakthroughs coming from BRICS in a little over a month from now, but we see most of these major players, they will be discussing connectivity and increasing connectivity, especially across Eurasia, and of course, trading in their own currencies. So this is all this is in a nutshell, is the process of Eurasia integration, which is the big story of the 21st century. And on the other side, what do we have? We have the president of the United States throwing a tantrum. There you go. The contrast couldn't be sharper, right?
A lot of people want to know, Pepe, before I move on to another story related to this, because I think there's a lot to actually, I believe the explosion of the development of the multipolar world is a big story not being covered. But before that, talk about, the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council. They are participating in this summit you were talking about. Many people want to know, Pepe, Saudi Arabia in or out? Is the UAE really, they're a member of BRICS, but are they really all in? Talk about the role here, because this is all about building bigger ties together between Asia, especially the China-led now ASEAN, huge, the development of ASEAN. But is the GCC, are these major players in the GCC, Saudi, UAE, who have flirted with BRICS, who UAE is in BRICS technically, are they really in it?
This is very complicated. Very, very complicated. UAE, they are in it. Their relationship with both China and Russia is very close. Do you know that this week there's a very, very important security, top ultra high level security meeting in Moscow, and guess who's there? Russia, Iran, UAE, so 3 BRICS, and guess who's the fourth one? North Korea, because of strategic relationship. So very, very important. We have 2 BRICS linked with strategic partnership, Russia and Iran. North Korea, because it's linked with a strategic partnership with Russia. And the Russians and the Iranians are confident enough to bring the UAE to a top-level security meeting. This tells us a lot about what's going on in the background that most people don't see, right? And this after MBZ, MBS, and the Emir of Qatar lavished tons of zillions of quadrillions of dollars on Trump during his West Asia trip, right? So, of course, they had to bow to the big emperor. And at the same time, they're looking east. They're looking Eurasia. They're looking at Eurasia integration, and they want to be part of it. and they are interested in everything, different green energy, tourism, everything applies. And also, of course, geopolitical and geoeconomic interactions, and doing more trade with their not only China, but with partners across ASEAN. There are lots of Persian Gulf businessmen here in Thailand and in Malaysia as well, in Singapore, obviously. They're coming and going, Southeast Asia, more and more. Just like the Russians, same thing. So, it's fascinating to see how these interactions are morphing into other sets of interactions, and in the end, it's a huge chessboard interaction, in fact, and we see the same players everywhere. Of course, in the case of these three GCCs, they had to do something to, let's say, appease the emperor. It was very, very clever. For instance, the whole Qatar case, including the free gift of a plane. You know why they got rid of that plane? Because the cost of maintaining that plane is astronomical. And the Qatar royal family said, we don't need this. So what do we do? Okay, let's give it. It's a gift. Perfect. That's a very simple, straightforward explanation. Whether UAE and Saudi are going to have these zillions of funds to actually invest the American economy, it's open to speculation. It's too early to tell. But of course, they put on a fantastic show to appease the emperor, and was very successful. And this is how you do with them. And they understand the psychology of the character in question very, very well. What they're doing here in Kuala Lumpur today, tomorrow is different. They came here to discuss serious business, not only with China, but with the fact that ASEAN is not China-led. ASEAN is China-compatible, to put it diplomatically. And they insist, the ASEAN 10, in the concept of ASEAN centrality. So ASEAN is the central mechanism, and all the members, they have to accommodate, including their internal problems, within this larger framework of ASEAN centrality. And this includes a very close relationship with China and treating China with a lot of respect, even if China has, for instance, South China Sea problems with some of the ASEAN members. And that's fascinating. I have been following ASEAN since I moved here 31 years ago. It's always fascinating to see the degree of mutual respect and respect that everybody has for instance, Myanmar is treated with respect. And many of these ASEAN governments, they are frankly adverse to the government of Myanmar. It doesn't matter. It's a matter of a very Asian not lose face and not make your so-called adversary lose face as well. Diplomacy, they're very, very good diplomats in a very ritualistic, almost like a Javanese sultan kind of way. It's beautiful to see them in action, politesse, respect, and trying to solve their problems within this larger ASEAN centrality framework. It works very well. And China, of course, they appreciate it because they are treated with respect. They appreciate because they understand the very long trade cultural ties they have with most of these. For instance, this week I was having a fascinating conversation that I cannot spill the beans about it too much, but basically we were discussing what happened to the so-called off-the-market gold of the Qing dynasty. When the Qing dynasty collapsed at the beginning of the 20th century, and a lot of this gold, guess where it is still now? Across ASEAN, in several ASEAN nations, Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, and here in Thailand. Nobody in the West knows about this, and this facilitates these invisible ties between China and the different ASEAN nations. So the GCC, when they look at it, they understand that very well, instinctively, in terms of respect, rules of conduct, and all that. They appreciate that a lot as well. And on top of it, the opportunity to do more business for them. So that's why this particular summit this week is so important. It is groundbreaking. The idea was an ASEAN idea. Nobody has claimed, but I suspect that this idea came from Mahathir himself. Mahathir, no, I'm sorry, Anwar Ibrahim. I have Mahathir in my head, old Malaysian Prime Minister. Anwar Ibrahim, the Malaysian Prime Minister, he was a superstar when he was with Putin at one of the forums in Russia last year. So because Malaysia is central for the Chinese diaspora, for the Indian diaspora, for the Malay archipelago as a whole, and it has many ties with Arabs for centuries. It is really a crossroads in Southeast Asia. They say, okay, let's bring the GCC. And then we put the three of us, what it's called here in Southeast Asia, the Golden Triangle. Let's start talking business from now on in a very, very serious manner. It's a fascinating. I could go on for hours on this, Danny, but it's a bit late.
Yeah, well, let's cover. I wanted to ask you about a few things now, just to wrap it up here, Pepe, for you, because I think this all ties in together. So, I don't know if you saw this video that has been taken completely out of context, because I wanted to bring in Russia quickly before moving on to this few developments. So, Vladimir Putin was talking to Russian businesses recently, and he said that here's what he had to say, because I think it's really important.
I saw that.
Yeah, right. He said, in response to what the United States and the West, of course, has done to Russia, he said this. He said, we need to get them in a chokehold. He said, they're trying to strangle us and we should reciprocate. So now this has been completely taken out of context. Some have been saying, oh, well, this is
taken out of context.
But essentially, what he's saying is that Russian businesses should do all that they can to stay firm and to continue on the path of self-reliance. And of course, this has a lot to do with BRICS and building ties there. Now, there's also this development I wanted you to comment on in conjunction with this. So Indonesia, one of the major ASEAN countries, just came in agreement with China. It's not letting me pull it up, but just here we go. Kiss the dollar goodbye. China and Indonesia go all in on a local currency deal. China and Indonesia has signed a memorandum of understanding on establishing a cooperation framework to promote bilateral transaction settlement in local currency, says the People's Bank of China. So, Pepe, these are very big developments. Talk about this. You were talking about earlier the currency question. Maybe factor all of this in here to the comments that Putin made, and just in general, where this is all going. It feels like a massive acceleration still of this multinodal world.
Yes, of course, it's massive acceleration. And this is BRICS in action. This announcement by Jakarta and Beijing, this is BRICS in action. This is what BRICS have been discussing, not only in the summits, but especially in the BRICS Sherpas and BRICS Business Council meetings previous to summits. We have to increase trade in our mutual currencies, everybody. And the fact that two big Asian powerhouses announced this straight up before the China ASEAN GCC summit and a month before the BRICS summit. It is, wow, pregnant with meaning, like an asteroid, right? An asteroid pregnant with meaning. Perfect, absolutely. So we're going to have announcements like that in sequence from now on. Well, how does that relate to Putin basically saying, which is what he was saying, that Russian businesses, they found a way to affirm themselves in the Russian market and possibly internationally as well. This is what he was saying. When you go to Russia nowadays and you see local brands in different fields making products that are in many cases as good as Western products, and in some cases even more efficient. Absolutely. It's exactly what the Chinese start doing, I would say, in an accelerated manner in the beginning of the 2000s. I remember when I was going to China in the early 2000s, and I was looking, for instance, at new sports clothes, for instance, or sneakers, or made in China. And when you look at it, wow, this is as good as any made in US products. And now they make it better. And at the time, they didn't have those spectacular SUVs that you see nowadays, you know. So the Russians are doing exactly the same thing. So, you know, you can eat a brand new Russian camembert, and you know, compared to a Russian, French camembert, it's pretty decent. So that's it. This is the import substitution, but done it rationally and with quality. Absolutely. And this applies to all BRICS nations. In terms of the key challenge for the whole of BRICS, and this is something that obviously Putin and Xi know, but they are already in a more advanced stage compared to most BRICS nations. The problem of debt. And our friend, the inestimable Professor Michael Hudson, has been on the forefront explaining in detail over and over again. There's no way that BRICS plus nations, and he was talking essentially about the partners and the future partners of BRICS, can develop without abolishing debt. So this is something that obviously is not going to be discussed in Rio in a month from now. But BRICS, they are building the, you know, let's say the roadmap to start discussing that in the long run. And it will probably have to be again under a Russian, an Iranian, or a Chinese presidency of BRICS again. Because, you know, India and Brazil are not going to discuss that. They are too compromised still with Atlanticism. Russia, Iran, and China, the new Primakov triangle, once again, it's a completely different story. They are way ahead. But this is the key, I would say, block against most BRICS partner nations, so they can start developing in earnest. And of course, this process of import substitution can accelerate. Of course, Russia, China, even Iran, they can help many of the partners in technological matters. Iran, for instance, is amazing. I didn't know. I visited a nanotechnology center in Tehran, and I didn't know that Iran is a nanotechnology superpower. It's among the top 5 in the world. Most people around nobody around the world knows that, apart from the clients. And they export nanotechnology products to over 50 nations. Can you imagine how helpful they can be, for instance, to the Alliance of Sahel States? To give just an example, you know. So this is something that will be discussed within the BRICS framework in the next few years. For the moment, the most important thing is the BRICS lab, as I call it, all the models that they are testing, and they started testing last year in Russia. And it's important that Putin made this very forceful point for everyone, knowing that he would be taken out of context. He was talking about import substitution and industries and manufacturers of global South countries, if we count Russia's global South, which in most aspects they are, they can do it. But the thing is, Russia has no debt, and most of these others, they do. So what to do about that?
Yeah,
Here we
no,
are.
I think
That's the main
yeah.
impasse.
No, I think that's a great point. And you know, you were mentioned if you had just a final comment on this speech, because I don't know if you heard Indonesia's president, his speech at this very conference that you were talking about, President Prabowo. He made an in relation to that debt question. You're talking about Michael Hudson. Yes, we love Michael Hudson. He talks about this problem of debt, and he talks about the China, and he expresses his appreciation. I'm just going to play it on mute because it's in the local language. So I'll just read it quickly as he speaks. But he says, I want to express my respect to the People's Republic of China, which has consistently defended the interests of countries in development, developing countries. They've consistently opposed oppression, opposed imperialism, opposed colonialism, opposed apartheid. The People's Republic of China defends liberation struggles. I mean, this is huge in countries that are still
this is enormous.
This is enormous. Oppressed, like saying this on a public forum, oppressed by imperialism and colonialism. And he talks about the cooperation in all fields that's going to be forged here. So Pepe, you know, I want you to just your final remarks on this. I mean, I feel like what we're seeing is a major transition here, which is not getting any attention, as in the contrast is so stark because you have the United States, you have the West. What are they doing? Well, they're continuing the Ukraine conflict, which is just absolutely, which is killing both the Russians and Ukrainians to a huger extent. Then you have, of course, what's happening in Gaza, the genocide going on steroids right now. And then you have this happening, and you see Indonesia just completely admitting that it's China. And of course, we know Russia is not far behind, standing side by side with China, that's doing the opposite. Your thoughts?
In the West, it's impossible for them to even understand what he's saying, Danny. No wonder this is not being played in the West. They don't even know what he's talking about. But here in Asia, especially in Southeast Asia, this was mega huge. You know what many people of my generation, for instance, you know what they were talking about? It's like this was an upgrade or a 2.0 of Bandung, where we had, for instance, Sukarno representing Indonesia and Xu Enlai representing China. And Sukarno and Xu Enlai, with Nehru, Nasser, etc., you know, they were the vanguard of the, at the time, not global South yet, at the time, the third world, right? And the spirit of final decolonization and let's build our own model. Now it's different. Now we have a superpower, China, and an aspiring superpower, Indonesia, even solving their possible South China Sea problems. When the Chinese, only a few years ago, they approached the Indonesians and they said, look, we have absolutely no designs on your islands in the South China Sea. Relax. Indonesia said, okay, fantastic. So let's do business. And this led to a lot of stuff, including, for instance, the first high-speed rail in Southeast Asia is Jakarta-Bandung. Once again, it's poetic justice. Bandung keeps coming back. The spirit of Bandung in 1955, you know, which was the, let's say, the birth of the global, what is now the global South. And now the global South has a power that at the time the third world didn't have, to, you know, at least counteract the avalanche from the empire. And Indonesia and China on the same page geoeconomically, wow, this is Indonesia, #1 nation in as economic powerhouses in Southeast Asia. It's enormous, enormous. And the Chinese, of course, they appreciate it because, of course, goes back to all the interactions in the past, goes back to the relationship of Chinese dynasties with royal houses in the Indonesian archipelago and all this. There's always an old oil rouse element around in Malaysia, in Indonesia, here in Thailand, with China, with different Chinese dynasties. This is, from the point of view of the West, this is incomprehensible. Incomprehensible. They cannot contextualize that, first of all, because they don't even understand the concept, right? And they cannot understand that this all involves mutual respect, like the way Prabowo addressed the Chinese, extremely respectful. And don't forget, Prabowo is a former general during the Suharto era. And relations between Indonesia and China during this time were not exactly stellar, to say the least, you know. And nowadays is a completely different story. Nowadays they all have their geoeconomic priorities, you know, right in front, and the geopolitical rearrangement of the chessboard. They understand perfectly where it's going. So it's. I wish I had more time to get a list of historical references to give all of you, our audience, how important this is and how transcending it is in terms of not only ASEAN unity, but East Asia unity, including China. You know, the other day, little details. The other day, I went to Chinatown in Bangkok. Once again, I haven't been there in quite a while. And in some parts of Chinatown, Bangkok, you feel that you are in the 18th century. And I went back to what it is, in fact, the oldest Chinese shrine in the whole of Thailand. And then I said, okay, who founded this shrine? Chinese merchants arriving in China. So they set up a shrine, and they start to do business with the local fishermen or whatever, you know. That's absolutely fascinating. So it's all interconnected, you know. Beautiful stories. I hope to tell these stories one day in a book.
Of course, yeah. No, and of course you'll always be invited back here, Pepe, to tell them. You know, because I think this, in all of the pessimism, what we are seeing, the horrors.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, this show wasn't necessarily dedicated to what's happening in Gaza, but we know what's happening in Palestine is absolutely horrific. And I think that this unity in this development of a multinodal world opens up more and more possibilities where development and this kind of cooperation takes precedence over, of course, the horrors that we are seeing, the U.S. and its various so-called partners, Israel, etc., what they're doing all over the world. But Pepe, it was great to be with you. Talk about what you're up to. We'll have you back on as soon as we can, but tell us what you're up to before I let you go.
I'm going to Moscow in 2 days. So I'll be in June, I'll be in Moscow, and I'm going to BRICS in early July. I have to be there.
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely have to have you on when that all, you know, as you cover Russia and, of course, BRICS coming up. So, Pepe, thanks so much. We have your links in the video description, of course, as always. Yeah, it was great to be with you.
And
Take
all
care.
of you, our audience, come to Southeast Asia.
Yeah, no, I was just in China. It's incredible. Everyone needs to go see what's going on. Pepe, I'll see you again soon.
Cheers.
Take care.
Thank you so much. Cheers. Bye-bye.
All right, without further ado, though, we have our next guest, of course, friend of the show, geopolitical analyst, international affairs specialist, security analyst. It is Mark Sleboda. Mark, good to see you again. It's been too long.
Danny, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Of course. Well, Mark, how about we just get started with all of the hysteria that we are seeing with regard to Ukraine. Let me just actually pull up what Donald Trump had to say on the tarmac. Here is his reaction to what have been, which I want you to get into, the major moves made by Russia, of course, on the battlefield from the buffer zone to the strikes. But this was Donald Trump's response to all of this.
I'll give you an update. I'm not happy with what Putin's doing. He's killing a lot of people, and I don't know what the hell happened to Putin. I've known him a long time, always gotten along with him, but he's sending rockets into cities and killing people, and I don't like it at all, okay? We're in the middle of talking, and he's shooting rockets into Kiev and other cities. I don't like it at all.
President, what do you want to do about that?
I'm surprised. I'm very surprised. We'll see what we're going to do. What am I going to tell you? You're the fake news, aren't you?
Yeah. Mark, of course, there are rumblings of sanctions. Lindsey Graham wants 500% tariffs on Russia. There is this, and of course, the long-range weapons, kabuki theater of sorts. But talk about first maybe what Russia is doing that's causing this response, because it seems like there's almost like this awakening of sorts of the reality of the situation that's being taken very, very badly here.
Okay, so first of all, let's address the absurd and obscene hypocrisy of this man, Donald Trump, who had just launched over 1,000 airstrikes on Yemen, killing hundreds, if not thousands of people. We don't really have a very good count of the civilian deaths in Yemen. It's quite hard. Who is facilitating the ongoing bombing and starvation blockade. I mean, an actual genocide taking place in Gaza. The U.S. facilitating that for Israel, and Donald Trump is going off about 13 people being killed in Russian targeted drone and missile strikes, well over 300 strikes total, right? So it was like nearly 300 drones and nearly another 100 missiles on top of that. And 13 people were killed. Now, we don't actually know who these people were, since most of these targets that Russia hit were the Kiev regime's military-industrial complex, including the Antonov plant in Kiev, previously an airline manufacturing plant, now used to produce drones, probably the Kiev regime's biggest single of their distributed network of drone building workshops. The Kiev regime made claims about, it shot down all but 5 of Russia's Garan drones, except that videos from on the ground in Kiev show 20 hits in a row by Garans on the Antonov plant. So if you saw big burning images from Kiev as a result of this strike, it is almost a certainty that what you saw was the Antonov drone production. So a military industrial site, perfectly legitimate. Were some of these 13 people killed their workers? Well, if so, that's actually legitimate targets, right? Were some of these other people killed by the Kiev regime's nearly non-existent, but still making an attempt air defense, which has often gone awry in the past, right? But let's assume that out of some nearly 400 strikes, Russia did kill 13 actual civilians as collateral damage. That is phenomenal in military terms. I mean, come on. 13 people out of 400 strikes, that's practically an impossible degree of yes, each individual actual civilian casualty is a tragedy, right? But we live in a world of tragedies. Let's be honest about that. We live in a world where countries use military, and not just countries, but non-state actors use military force against each other all the time. And that
I think the precision, Mario, is what I say. That's the precision of Russia, because when you look at what the United States did, there was just a report that said what the United States did in Yemen was just was so imprecise that it essentially just killed a bunch of people, as you said, and wasted a whole lot of money. It seems like the opposite here is going on, but continue.
Yes. All right. So that is, forgive the fall moralizing. The other thing, there's another clip from, I believe it's from later in the same sequence, where there's a journalist that points out to Trump, whom is claiming that Putin has gone crazy. I don't know why he's doing this. That pointing out that the Kiev regime had launched more than there was a total of 1,000 drones over 3 days, right? A large number of which were targeting Moscow. And a few of them did get through, right? I mean, not a lot of them. It has to be said that one of the differences is that Russia has a very powerful and very competent air defense and electronic warfare network. Well, the Western press even has been admitting how they don't. Everyone says we don't have enough Patriots, we don't have enough interceptors, right? Rubio, we don't have more Patriots to give. We asked the Germans and the Greeks, but they don't want to send them, right? You know, there's no launchers, there's no interceptor missiles, and what else the Kiev regime has in terms of air defense. The French and the Italian systems are also, according to Ukrainian air defense sources, actually, they're also completely out of those as well. They've got nothing, right? They've got very little. So if they're trading long-range blows, right, between drone strikes, large scale, it must be said, large scale, long range drone strikes in Russia, at Moscow and elsewhere, and Russia launching long range drone and missile strikes. Russia's strikes, the Garans, the payload, the accuracy, much higher, right? Much more effective, and much. The Kiev regime has much less capable, efficient, and in all sense air defense than Russia has. So Russia is able to take those long range trade and barely break a sweat in doing so. So and it was pointed out that Russia is loudly talking about that during one of these drone swarms that was targeting the Kursk region exactly when Putin's helicopter was landing in the Kursk region. Putin was visiting the Kursk region for the first time since its full liberation by the Kiev regime, and they, quote unquote, got caught up in a drone swarm, such that Russian air defense and Russian air forces had to take active measures, according to the Russian government, to clear a path for Putin's helicopter, right? You know, the equivalent in this terms of Air Force One, right? From landing safely. And there is an open question, right? I don't, first of all, I don't believe in coincidences. I don't believe in those kinds of coincidences. So obviously, the Kiev regime was attempting to target the Russian president. The question is, how involved was the West in this, right? How involved with, in terms of satellite data and planning and everything else, and was the U.S. involved, right? If not the U.S., then certainly the United Kingdom and France. We don't know the answers to these questions, but the Russians certainly want to know. And that Russia's strikes, are certainly being pitched, and there's a good argument to make, as retaliation to the 3 days of 1,000 Kiev regime drone strikes, which included Moscow. So obviously Trump did not know this. He had to be told this by a journalist, and he said specifically, I don't know anything about that. So one, right, the orange buffoon is lying. Or two, which I find far more likely, he is less informed than the average viewer, far, far less informed than the average viewer of the Danny Haiphong show. Just saying, right? just the average viewer, right? The guy who
Right.
chimes in for 15 or 20 minutes of a conversation. So
Right.
my first question then is, what the hell is Tulsi Gabbard doing?
I heard he doesn't sit in on those meetings, Mark. I heard he doesn't sit in on the. But anyway, the
Well,
DNI
I
meeting.
mean, she should like go in and twist his arm behind his back and make him sit down and listen to his intelligence briefings. He's the president of the United States. If he's not listening to them, right? Because I don't know, right? Maybe she's not doing her job. Maybe they're not properly informing. Maybe she's not vetting everything that goes to his desk. I don't know about you, Danny, but I mean, I would sacrifice limbs for U.S. presidential intelligence briefings, right? That would be such a bonus to my job. I mean, firstborn child, hey, take my secondborn child too, right? I mean, in order to have that kind of intelligence information. So whether she's not informing him, whether he's simply not attending, which is, I mean, that is a criminal level of incompetence, especially when he is supposedly pushing some type of a diplomatic push, presenting the U.S. as some kind of uninterested third-party mediator between Russia and the U.S.'s proxy regime in Kiev. This is just, I mean, if he did not know, which it appears that he might, in one degree or another, this is criminal ignorance, and we have to always now factor that in to our understanding and analysis, in that the US president simply doesn't have a fucking clue what's going on in Ukraine or anywhere else in the world for that matter, probably even most of the United States. That has to be where we have to now factor that in to everything. He goes off like this, calling the leader of the other nuclear superpower, right, and many other terms, one of the three great powers, crazy, right, and he's going to destroy his country, and going off on him like this, and he doesn't have the slightest idea what's going on, of the context of what actually happened, anything. So what else is there for Russia to do in such a situation but just ignore the noise and continue trucking on the battlefield with the looming big offensives coming this summer, right? Because obviously things can only be settled on the ground. And of course, probably the other big news, right, other than the long-range drone strikes back and forth, which it has to be said that for the first time, to a significant degree, there is a number of publications in the Western mainstream media who have been dragged, however grudgingly, kicking and screaming, to acknowledging that Russia is winning the drone war, both the drone evolution race, the drone production race, and the drone use race over Ukraine, as well as every other factor of this conflict, whether we're talking resources and manpower and artillery shells and everything else, right? The Economist was talking about how Russia is raining hellfire down on Kiev. And the Washington Post was lamenting about how the Kiev regime is scrambling to deal with Russia's electronic warfare jamming proof fiber optic drones, now with cables, able to operate, close to 20 kilometers deep behind the Kiev regime lines, absolutely eviscerating their logistics. And there was the Economist, the Times also ran a piece about Putin's increasingly brutal drone warfare, where they admitted that for the first time that I've seen in print, that Russia's drone production in terms of FPV drones, fiber optic drones, and others had surpassed the Kiev regime. Now, newsflash, when you're comparing Russia's military industrial scale factory production of very high quality drones, right, that keep evolving as this conflict goes on, to the, shall we say, artisanal, mostly underground, small distributed workshops that the Kiev regime is forced to assemble drones in. And even those are hunted constantly by Russia, including the strikes that hit the Antonov this weekend. But I mean, of course, Russia is going to take the lead in this. But there was also the acknowledgement that it's just not winning in quantitative terms, that it's winning in evolutionary and qualitative terms as well. And this is a big change because for about a year now, pretty much really since the Kiev regime failed in their NATO planned and equipped 2023 summer offensive. Since then, the story has been, Ukraine has focused on the drone war where they have an advantage. And that is where, that has led them to draw the conflict to a stalemate. They've replaced everything else that they don't have, right? The artillery, the other long range strikes, the tanks, everything else that Russia has an advantage, right? But they have lots of drones, and that's how because this is a conflict of the future. But now they're being forced to admit that drones are not the savior of the Kiev regime. It's not going to save the Kiev regime, and that Russia is out producing them and out innovating the Kiev regime, and therefore the entirety of the West, who is behind them in the drone race and the drone war, both in the factories on the battleground as well. So these are it's a narrative shift. We'll see if it endures. But it is something that has hit multiple major publications this week. So it's becoming harder for them to deny it. The other major news this week is the walked forward, then partially walked back, and we don't know what's going on with the new chancellor of the Reich, Germany, Merz, admitting that putting out that all restrictions on the Kiev regime's use of weapons deep inside Russia, if in fact they ever existed, are now gone. Not just for Germany, but for the UK, for France, for all the other European countries. And he even spoke for the United States, interestingly, something that hasn't been picked up by any other official that I've seen in the United States, and speaking for the US as well. Now, this was later partially walked back by another German official within the new Grand Coalition government coming from the SPD faction. So we don't know if they said that this wasn't a change and the policy is still the same as it has been. Well, and then that's the question, well, what has the policy been? And what a lot of people are reading in this is that Germany is about to send their Taurus cruise missiles, air-launched cruise missiles, which Scholz had long, objected to. And actually, maybe that was the only thing he held firm on during his entire chancellorship even. But he did hold firm on that, at least up until the end. And Merz, before coming into office, before the parliamentary elections in Germany, was very insistent that he wanted to see the Tauruses delivered. My guess is that the Tauruses have already been delivered, but they're still going to need Germans on the ground to use them, and they're going to need U.S. satellite intelligence data to properly use them. And they presumably are going to have to be fired from F-16s. which is going to be an interesting bet with the Kiev regime, having such problems with their nascent F-16 fleet, losing several of them already, apparently due to inexperience, accidents, possibly shot down by their own air defense, whatever it is. But I mean, they've essentially been a non-factor since, in the months that they've now, half a year, more than half a year, have been supposedly in the Kiev regime. Because these Taurus cruise missiles, they do have a longer range than the Storm Shadows and the Scalps that had previously been delivered by the UK and France. More than another third again as long. So we're looking at a range from 300 kilometers now becoming 500 kilometers. So it's more significant, but they're still going to have to air launch them. And that's going to put the F-16s, if they want to get, anything beyond the front lines, they're going to have to start putting them into areas where they might be vulnerable to being shot down by the Russians instead of hiding in West Ukraine on the borders. So look in the next month to see these Tauruses used for the first time. That would be my bet. Now, Russian air defense, as they have with the Storm Shadows, the Scalps, they will quickly adapt, right? The Kiev regime will get some hits in, particularly in the beginning. And this has already been recognized and known by the West. So expect to see the Kiev regime, with NATO planning, launch a large number of these Taurus cruise missiles right away. Supposedly, they'll get about 150, right? And that's it, right? They're not going to get any more than that, because Germany only has about 250 of these operable, right? They have about 500 of them. About 250 of them are operable. The rest will have to be refurbished to be put back into use. And they want to keep a minimum. The German Bundeswehr, the German military, wants to keep 100 of them minimum on hand. That's what we have from previous leaked German generals' conversations about the Taurus missile use. So that's 150, right? That is what they're going to get. And they'll probably try to blow all of that right away to get the biggest bang for the buck. Because after just a few uses, Russia's, it's Russian air defense and electronic warfare is like the Borg, right? In Star Trek, right? Yeah, your phasers, you got 3 shots before the Borg shields adapt, and then that's it. They're completely ineffective after that. And it was Jake Sullivan who just admitted in the last couple of months that for all the vaunted noise about the ATACMS missiles, they had no operational effect whatsoever. Russia very quickly adapted to them. The same thing with the Storm Shadows and the Scalps. When's the last time you heard about any big success with those? So my theory here is we see several developments. We see these long-range strikes of drones going back and forth. And a big part of this is an air defense war of attrition. Because to bring down these drones and missiles, right, each side has to expend air defense assets. In a lot of cases, that means air defense missiles. Not always. You can use some other things, maybe for the Garans and some other things. But that's the majority of what's being used, right? And we know that the Kiev regime has a vast shortage of air defense interceptors. We know that Russia has a much larger supply and production of them, but we don't have a good sense of where their red lines are either. So what it appears is that these strikes by the Kiev regime, right? We saw another 100 drone strike in the last evening. So we're seeing over 100 long-range drones a night, sometimes 200, 300, right? All constantly. They are trying to map out and exhaust Russia's air defense, most likely in preparation for a renewed Western missile strike, probably involving the new Tauruses and probably some stockpiled Storm Shadows and Scalps as well, to maximize what they can get out of them. Because presumably then they'll know more about Russia's air defense locations, all right, and their capabilities. They'll have exhausted them bringing down large numbers of drones, right? And then particularly if they're using the Tauruses for the first time, they'll be more effective. And so you see a big missile strike all at once. Now, that's a theory. We'll see if that's what happens. But if so, it's going to have to happen soon, right? To take advantage of what the Kiev regime might have gained with mapping out and to what degree they have exhausted Russian air defense in the last week with these trading long-range strike blows back and forth, right? So, I mean, it's an air defense war of attrition fought with drones, and on the Russian side, drones and missiles. So it's you see that these two stories actually dovetail right into each other. The big drone conflict, long-range strikes going on, over the battlefield over the last week, and this announcement by Merz and the possibility that the Tauruses may be delivered, may have already been delivered. And then you start to see the possibility that they may be linked. And we'll find out whether that's true or not, probably in the coming days, right? I would guess, not even more than a week. But it's interesting. Of course, on the ground, Russia's still advancing everywhere, and Donald Trump is losing his shit, and Macron is being knocked around by his husband, whatever. Zelensky is being the same. And while Trump is going off and saying that Putin is going crazy and I don't know what he's doing, he's also saying that Zelensky needs to shut up. And every time he opens his mouth, he makes things worse, and just shut up. So obviously, the orange man is losing his cool.
Yeah, well, that is quite obvious. You mentioned, Mark, that there is a looming Russian offensive, and also we've had very bold comments from Dmitry Medvedev, of course, Putin's number 2, on the buffer zone question. And this has also been talked about in Western mainstream media. Talk about Russia's implementation of this buffer zone. It seems like a very serious move, and it goes into what you've covered so deeply, which is these drone attacks, which I think it was like something like 300 a day targeting Russia for a long time. And then you have Trump saying, no idea why there's any kind of response from Russia at all. But so talk about this buffer zone, especially militarily, what its significance is. It seems like a pretty big
the
step
first thing it has to say is that these drone strikes, to any extent that I've been able to tell, and I'm living in Moscow, and I usually never even know when they're happening because they're just not effective, right? It's not like Russian citizens in Moscow or elsewhere, unless they're right on the front lines, are like, oh, there's incoming Ukrainian drone. No, I mean, there's none of that. We don't even know it's happening because there's really no effect, because very, very, very few of them are getting through Russia's air defense and electronic warfare, and those that do are still having any real effect. But Putin, after the liberation of Kursk and the Kiev regime making renewed attempts to launch new ill-fated incursions in Belgorod, in Kursk, and in Bryansk region in the past 10 days as well. DRG groups sneaking through forests, trying to get up through a large forest belt that runs from the Ukrainian border, and trying to use that to sneak up near Bryansk and being caught out. But Russia, Putin has more forcibly announced the creation of a large buffer zone, effectively expanding the existing northern front across the entirety of the Russian-Ukrainian border in the north, right? On the Russian side, that is Bryansk, and in the furthest to the west, Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod. And on the Ukrainian side, that is Chernigov and Sumy and Kharkov, right? That's the lineup on either side. And Russia is declaring a buffer zone that will be created in Chernigov and Sumy and Kharkov. And the goal is to push back the Kiev regime forces, first of all, on the ground, to prevent these type of cross-border excursions. But there is also a drone reason and also long-range strike, presumably missiles as well, is that the majority of these long-range strikes that the Kiev regime is conducting, mostly with drones at the moment, trying to reach Moscow, are coming right from northern Sumy, right? I mean, that's the place that they are able to launch within the maximum range of the drones they have. So a goal of this buffer zone that Putin is declaring is not only to push them back on the ground, but to push their drone and presumably missile launches as well, further back as well, to try to put Moscow and the surrounding regions around Moscow, presumably Kazan as well, where there's big military industrial facilities out of reach. So there's two reasons for this buffer zone. One is on the ground, and one is about long range strikes, particularly with drones. So that's why. Now, Putin has declared a buffer zone before, but he seems far more serious about it this time, and we see Russian forces acting on it. And it is painfully clear that these creation of buffer zones in Sumy and Chernigov and Kharkov could very quickly lead themselves into, oh, well, we have almost the entirety of these three regions. Wouldn't they like to have referendums too, and see if they would rather get out of the crazy dodge of the Kiev regime-controlled Ukraine and join Russia? Particularly, Kharkov in particular is majority Russian-speaking and Russian-leaning at the least. And you probably have all heard that at the recent brief supposed direct negotiations between the Kiev regime and the Russian team in Istanbul, that the leader of the Russian team, Medinsky, said, "Okay, you don't want to withdraw from the four regions, which we insist on as the most basic prerequisites before any ceasefire. That you must withdraw from Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, and Zaporozhye. If you don't want to withdraw from the four now, then next time we're going to be talking 8. And boy, if you include Crimea in that, you add Chernigov, Sumy, and Kharkov region, boy, that adds up to 8, doesn't it? So Russia is probably, I mean, Russia will see how things develop, how effective their offensive are, what the West's desperate counter reactions are to their inability to impose a ceasefire on Russia. We'll see, but Russia is certainly considering broader options with Chernigov, Sumy, and Kharkov that may eventually go beyond the creation of buffer zones in these regions as well.
Yeah, and to follow up on this, Mark, talk about these advances and this looming offensive that you have mentioned, because it seems to me that this sudden, Putin is crazy, he's just killing people for no reason. It seems like it's coming from this place of, I don't want to call it realization, because I truly do believe that while Donald Trump definitely isn't the brightest bulb in the batch, I think the entire U.S. political class, of course, Europe, I think they all know how bad the situation is. So talk about this looming offensive, what it really means, what its significance will be.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I think that the majority of the Western political elite are literally constantly sipping their own Kool-Aid and really don't know what's going on.
I could say both could be true. Yeah, but continue, please.
But anyway, so what we're looking at with the Russian offensives, yeah, I mean, the Kiev regime is talking about it. The West is talking about it. We've been talking about that it's coming. The Wall Street Journal admitted, I guess, just about 2 weeks ago now, that Russia has 2 entire reserve armies already dedicated to the special military operation, right? Volunteer contract soldiers, 2 entire new armies. We're talking some 240,000 troops trained up, equipped even to a better degree with the newest tanks, drone, other equipment, right? Compared to what's actually on the front lines right now, just being held in reserve, right? So Russia has the 640 to 700,000 troops already in the SM zone on the front lines, and they've got an additional 240,000, right? Which are, trained up people. They're led by people who have already been part of other units that have already been part of the conflict. So that experience, of course, they're not, completely green. They're officers and, some peppered, people all through it, but they haven't been committed yet. And while it has been a question about, having them in reserve as a deterrent against NATO, I think it's becoming more and more apparent with, France tapping out in the last few weeks and, all of these other things going on, saying we don't have anything left to send the Kiev regime in, and this failure to assemble any type of coalition of the willing to put troops on the ground in Ukraine, that NATO just isn't a threat at this point. The threat of NATO direct intervention, the only threat there is a human tripwire, which isn't really much of a threat unless Russia, accepts that bluff. So it is far more likely that we're going to see one or both of these reserve armies set into offensive sometime in the next couple of months, right? Sometime before the summer to get maximum use out of an offensive. And that will come on top of the already, shall we say, offensive pressure that Russia is exerting and getting results from, dramatic results even, already all along the contact line, everywhere, right? The Kiev regime's defensives in the area of north of Toretsk towards Konstantinovka are collapsing. They're collapsing in a big way in the last week. Russia's making big gains there. Also, Russia has good advances around Pokrovsk, Seversk, and Kupiansk are all effectively now in pinchers with their supply lines under extreme threat by the edges of these pinchers with Russian drones, Russian artillery, and the like strangling off their logistics and supply. As there was also in the Western press in the last week, there was an acknowledgement. They're talking about it that it's new Russian tactics. It's not really new. Russia's been doing this for a long time, but that Russia sends forward a frontal assault of infantry as a pinning mechanism. Then they move to the flanks and they eviscerate supplies with drones, artillery, and other long-range strikes. And then they bring the FABs up and bomb all of the regime's fortifications in an area in the back, from a distance, because that's what FABs can do. Again, this isn't new, but there is an acknowledgement of how effective this rather simple, staged Russian approach is, and how the Kiev regime just at this point due to a lack of almost everything, most especially manpower, but also artillery and everything else. And now with increasing Russian even drone dominance, that they're just not able to resist this method of Russia moving forward. It's not dramatic Hollywood style maneuver warfare of the U.S. running over a third world country, but it is not deniable anymore about the effectiveness of Russia's strategies like this. So that new offensive or offensives would come on top of this. So we know that it will probably occur before the summer. The question then is where? And there's been a bunch of noise this week, some headlines about Russia has 50,000 troops assembling in the Kursk region for a movement into Kharkov. Okay, that's not an offensive, right? 50,000 troops is nothing, right? It's enough to advance positions, to expand the buffer zone, like Russia was talking about. But for instance, it's nowhere near enough to move towards Kharkov city, right? Russia would have to have well upwards of 200,000, maybe 300,000 or more to take a city the size of Kharkov, right? Which is big, expansive, has lots of supply lines, fortifications and the like. Even if the Kiev regime lacked huge amounts of manpower to defend it, it would still be a serious logistical undertaking, even, right? Much less a military one. So no, Russia is not about to move on Kharkov city. And if they say, oh, Russia failed to take Kharkov city, well then, yay, you successfully knocked down another straw man. Wonderful. Good job. That's not what's going on. So that's the question. Where will we see these offensives? Well, I mean, there is always the possibility of a decapitation strike towards Kiev coming out of Sumy or through Chernigov, or both. That's a possibility. There is the possibility. There is also talk that Russia has big military exercises with Belarus planned in the autumn, and the Kiev regime is already warning that they'll use that as an excuse to move on Kiev again from Belarus, from the north. But that's already quite a ways away. So let's put that back a bit. We're going to see something big before then. We could see something in the south moving up through Orehov and towards Zaporozhye city, or we could see something, an additional large influx of troops into the battles of Donetsk to finish off this last defensive line, this Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka line, right, with Russia already rapidly moving on Konstantinovka at the moment, effectively, within the suburbs, and Konstantinovka already coming under artillery fire and the like. But I think the forces there are already capable of doing that. So I would expect that if we're going to see a new major Russian offensive with new troops, large numbers of new troops and equipment that have not yet been committed, it will probably be effectively a new front. That would be my guess, that it won't just be into the Donbass, which I think it will take its time, but that's already accounted for. We'll see. We're going to see it somewhere. And I'll tell you the real truth when we're doing these offensives in you want to call it modern war or future war that is playing out now, is that you don't just have one offensive plan. You have 3 or 4 or 5 of them. And the reason for this is because both sides have 24/7 nearly comprehensive drone a satellite and drone reconnaissance. That makes generating strategic surprise, even down to the operation tactical level surprise, extremely difficult, right? So the way you deal with that, is you, first of all, you don't assemble large numbers of troops on the front line in any one location. That's why a lot of the combat that is occurring on the front line is company level or lower for the most part, right? Because if you assemble any large numbers of people and equipment, right, and don't move very rapidly with them, right, on something, they will very quickly, if not beforehand, be identified and be hit with drones and missiles and HIMARS or tornadoes on the other side, long range strikes, right? So this type of what has developed in response to the predominance of satellite and drone reconnaissance and accurate long range strike capability facilitated by drones, by reconnaissance drones and satellites, is distributed front lines with a high degree of fluidity. You have to keep your forces like water, right? Capable of surging at the last minute in any one particular direction when you detect weakness, when to exploit something quickly. And so what you need for such a strategy of dealing with this situation is, one, you need a large number of competent, trained manpower, which Russia has and the Kiev regime no longer has, right? What troops they have, a large number of them are forcibly conscripted people with, at best, a couple of weeks of training that are capable of defending trenches, maybe, but not much more, right? And a very small reserve of, shall we say, increasingly smaller reserve of experienced battle troops to plug holes in the lines and so forth. But Russia has that manpower. And the other thing you need is extremely capable logistics with a deep reserves of equipment and munitions and able to move them around very quickly and efficiently. And Russia has that in most areas of the front as well, often far superior to the Kiev regime. So Russia will have plans for several offensives, and then the factors on the ground, where the Kiev regime sends reinforcements and where they don't, where Russia manages to break through, or where defensive lines at least are crumbling, and there is an exploitation. So if you ask where is the Russian offensive going, definitively, the Russian military may not know at this point, right? They may have a few different possible offensive locations mapped out, and maybe at some point 3 of them will be put into play, and maybe one of them will only be a decoy meant to draw troops and confuse the matter, and then maybe the final 2, they'll both be launched, or one will be launched and the other not. What I'm saying is that a lot of these decisions now have to be made snap, and a kind of fluid ability to surge quickly to exploit things. So, I mean, is that me saying I don't know? Yeah, but to be fair, the Russian military may not definitively know either, because it will be determined by factors on the ground when the moment comes.
Yeah, and before we move on to some other matters, Mark, maybe you could talk about, in every report that I hear, the Washington Post just published one about the looming Russian offensive, saying something very similar to you, actually. It could be here, could be there, but focusing on Donbass, stretching out Ukrainian forces, not only across the front line, but through the establishment of a buffer zone. But I wanted to ask you about, there's always this comment that sanctions and the continued fighting on the front line is degrading Russian forces, degrading the Russian military. And yet it seems to contradict these actions that the West and the United States are taking against Russia. There's even a report, I don't know if you saw it, Mark, about NATO in the Wall Street Journal. On the one hand, they say Russia is incredibly degraded because of this conflict, and the other, they say that the U.S. is now reinforcing Europe's northern front because they fear war with Russia, focusing on militarizing, of course, the Baltic states and newly newer NATO members, Finland and Sweden. So talk about this talk about the weakening and degrading Russian military and Russian forces as they continue to insist on this offensive and the fears of war with Russia.
Okay, so I mean, let's first of all deal with this nonsense about Russia's forces on the northern front. So you bring Finland and Sweden into NATO, right? And you pitch that as you don't want NATO expansion. Well, here's these two free Cold War neutral countries, and they're part of NATO. So how do you like that? And Russia's like, well, okay. I mean, they were already kind of de facto NATO, but if you really want to do that, then these formerly demilitarized borders, well, we're going to have to take defensive measures now that they're part of NATO. And, the U.S. is already scoping out putting military bases and the like in these countries for use of us against us in the north. We're going to have to militarize these borders, and we're going making plans to establish, new troop formations to put large numbers of troops there where there were never troops before. And Russia goes ahead and does what they said they were going to do in response to new NATO members to the north of Russia. And now the West is crying that Russia is doing exactly what it would say it would have to do as defensive measures in response to the expansion of NATO to the north. I mean, it's so predictable. I mean, it's everyone is going through these motions, right? There is no real threat of Russia moving into the north, and there's not really a big NATO threat of invasion from the north, although there is increased threats to Russia's Murmansk, Kola Peninsula, the Black Sea Fleet, because the U.S. will be able to position powerful radars, signal intelligence, air bases, maybe even missiles, which would definitely create some more tensions. And in Finland and possibly in Sweden as well. Finland has a large border with Russia. Sweden doesn't have an immediate border, but even the Finnish border is largely mostly inhospitable frozen swamp, to put a fine turn on it. It's not prime invasion territory. You do have these games that the Baltics in particular, but obviously assisted by other NATO countries like Poland and others, have been playing over the last week, with the ineffectiveness, no matter how many rounds of sanctions, 28,000 plus sanctions we're at on Russia at this point. And we're on the 17th, already planning for the 18th and even the 19th upcoming rounds of sanctions. And yeah, they haven't had any effect yet. And actually, Russia's economy is growing much faster than ours. But the next sanctions package will surely be the one that the straw that breaks the camel's back. I mean, hope dies last, as they say. But because of the ineffectiveness of this, particularly on Russia's energy trade, there have been increasingly loud yapping noises from the Baltics in particular about stopping Russian energy shipping through the Baltic Sea, which they increasingly, with Finland and Sweden joining NATO, they increasingly talk about in the military and political journals as a NATO sea now. And how dare Russia even transit through? They shouldn't even be able to transit through the Baltic. Now, never mind, of course, that there is a small but a real lane of international shipping that goes right through the middle of the Baltic, which Russia, from St. Petersburg, can easily access, right? And they have no right to stop anything there. However, with the new additions and the Baltics in particular, their country's exclusive economic zones, which extend beyond their realms of territorial control, do cross these lines. And there's no change in international legal status, but that's not going to stop them from attempting to obscure the matter. And you will continually hear Russia's shipping fleet, right, referred to as the shadow fleet, like we're back in Babylon 5 or something like that. Ooh, the shadow fleet, right? What does that mean? I mean, do they have stealth drives or something like that, right? You know, crewed by criminals? No, it's simply their insurance is not through Western companies, primarily the big maritime insurance industry out of London. It means they don't control the insurance for these ships. So they've been making increasing noise that they are going to seize Russian ships on the pretext of checking them for proper insurance. And they attempted to do so just over a week ago. They sent the entire Estonian flotilla of 6 patrol boats, 6 patrol boats, mighty flotilla, supported evidently by a Polish F-16. And they tried first to order the oil tanker, the Russian oil tanker, to leave the zone of international shipping and enter an Estonian port. And the Russian oil tanker captain told them to go pound sand. And then they attempted to board this ship with their patrol boats and with helicopters. And the Russian captain just pushed the pedal to the metal and prevented them from doing so. And then Russia sent a Su-35 onto the scene, rapidly jetted it there, and the yapping dogs, mighty flotilla scattered, and the whole affair came into nothing. Although a Portuguese F-16 that was part of this NATO contingent now stationed in the Baltics was then put up in the air. And there was a question whether both sides are going to start building up air assets in the air over this incident. Well, it stopped there, but you can see how quickly such a thing can get out of hand. And a couple days later, Russia actually, in response, did seize an Estonian tanker, which had crossed into Russision territory out of the international shipping. And as far as I know, they haven't given it back yet. Oh, you want to play these games and try to seize our ships? Well, we can actually seize one of yours. And now it appears that Russia is going to the extreme length of creating convoys for their shipping through the Baltics, right? Military convoys, like World War II style, military and their naval ships escorting convoys of merchant ships to deter the Baltics and any other Western NATO countries from doing something stupid and provocative. Because let's make it clear, intercepting Russian shipping in international waters would be an act of war. Well, first of all, it would be an act of piracy, but it would also be an act of war. And Russia is attempting to bring that home. So that is another potential flashpoint that both sides are playing a bit of a chicken. I mean, mostly the Baltics and NATO, but such things, mistakes can always be made and get out of hand quickly, which is why it would be much better if these games weren't played to begin with. So that's another potential problem that Russia has to deal with, that NATO is just really doing stupid and desperate and provocative things, which brings up the question of new sanctions. Sanctions on what, right? More sanctions on the Shadow Fleet going after individual ships, the ship captain's daughter, the best friend of the ship captain's, godparents or something like that. These ridiculous things that the extents they're going to. But any additional sanctions are not really, sanctions on Russia. They're sanctions on the rest of the world to try to force them to stop trading with Russia. Particularly, we're talking energy, and particularly here, we're talking China and India, right? Which both countries have indicated you don't dictate who we trade with. And both China and India have once again increased their imports of Russian oil and at least oil, possibly other things, in the last 2 weeks as well. So, I mean, Lindsey Graham can talk bone-crushing sanctions all he want, right? And sure, any sanctions until Russia finds workarounds would have some effect, but that will just send the global price of oil going skyrocketing and bring up even more inflationary pressures for American citizens as well. I mean, that would just be a big impact on the whole global economy. And at the end of the day, when the dust settles, it would be the same thing as it always has been in this conflict. It's trying to sanction the world's biggest commodity supplier, who provides finite supplies of absolutely essential commodities to the global market, whether we're talking energy, whether we're talking agricultural products, whether we're talking metals, is a fool's game, and tells that you don't understand the Russian economy and you don't even understand global markets.
Mark, I've wanted to ask a security expert like yourself about, over the weeks that I have been away. I wanted to ask about the Golden Dome that Donald Trump has proposed, of course, in inspiration from Israel's Iron Dome.
Yeah,
Now,
but it's got to be tacky gold lame painting on top,
yeah,
branded with Trump. It's got to be the
exactly.
Golden Dome, air defense and casinos.
It's in a lot of ways it's absurd. But you have talked about talk about inflationary pressures. I mean, this is going to be so costly. But Russia, China, the DPRK, North Korea, they've all come out very strongly against it. This is what China's foreign ministry spokesperson Mao Ning said. It said the project will heighten the risk of turning space into a war zone and creating space arms race and shake the international security and arms control system. We know now that very recently, Russian foreign ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said that it's a reckless approach to global stability through this pursuit of a worldwide anti-ballistic missile system. On military terms, talk about this, the feasibility of it. What is the significance of it? Why are these powers concerned about this? Why is I guess you could say the rising multipolar world led by Russia, China, concerned about this? What are your insights into it?
So, first of all of the great powers who are capable of are doing their best to build up defense shields, air defense networks, right? Particularly against ballistic missiles, but increasingly not just against ballistic missiles, right? We're talking Russia, the United States, and China, right? For the most part, those are who we're talking about, and all three of the countries, do have varying degrees of defenses against missiles and other long range strikes for their countries, and they're constantly attempting to expand that, right? Increase coverage, create more layers, create more launchers, electronic warfare steps for some things, new types of systems. The real danger here, of course, is the ultimate way of getting out of certain problems with defense against ballistic missiles is by putting elements in space. Of course, said elements could also be used for offense as well as defense, which is where, the whole question of the militarization of space comes in. But let's be honest, the militarization of space is already happening, right? Russia, China, and the U.S. have all demonstrated anti-satellite capabilities. India has been playing around with this as well, and other countries, right? It's just a matter of, does the U.S. kick this militarization of space race off faster in a higher direction by spending larger amounts of money and development on it? Possibly. But to be perfectly honest, the U.S. already has real problems with air defense, just with production of standard air defense interceptor missiles like the Patriots, much less expanding into some giant Golden Dome project. To be perfectly honest, it sounds mostly like it's at least 80% boondoggle and pork barrel for various portions of the military-industrial complex, to fill the troughs for them to feed from. At a problem when Trump is simultaneously talking about cutting government spending and everything, and at the same time the Pentagon is getting more money than ever before. But is it enough to cover a big new expansion of probably the most expensive field of military technology and deployment, which is air and missile defense? I mean, this is very complex. It's very expensive for everyone involved, and the U.S. is already way overcommitted with air defense assets and way exhausted their supplies of even normal air defense interceptors and missiles for years now, and are continuing to do so. So Russia is not making a big deal out of this right now. And their official comments from the Kremlin was, well, I mean, if they want to provide, missile defense for their own country, that's their own business. We all do it. Now, part of that is diplomatic, because right now there's this game of manipulating and maneuvering Trump, that they don't want to antagonize him while they're still attempting to get him to walk away from Ukraine without, unleashing too much on Russia in the process. But I think there's also a bit of realism on the Russian side that this is happening, and all the great powers that are capable are doing it to one extent or another, and to what extent will also be determined by what the other great powers are doing. And in response to that, if we're in a new arms race in that side, well, then so be it. We're already in so many new arms races. It seems almost unavoidable at this point. So I don't regard it as it's not in my top 10 of the most important things going on right now. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, no, I mean, it stands the question also, Mark, the way that the United States, the way that the West is reacting to this changing world, because in many ways this Golden Dome idea makes an assumption that countries like Russia, for example, that have these massively impressive weapons like hypersonic missiles, are looking to use them against the United States, to launch them, right? It's this Cold War mentality. But perhaps you could talk about what is really at root here, because many people assumed when Donald Trump came into office, Mark, that this would change, that there wouldn't be a kind of Cold War mentality, that we would be moving more toward the United States being realistic about its position in the world. But it seems like whether it's on the Golden Dome or this kind of bait and switch and very chaotic approach to Russia, all of this buildup militarily and economic warfare on China, and of course what's happening in West Asia, there seems to be a project of still trying to expand and maintain the dominance of the United States. Talk about this, and is this working? Because the Trump administration looks and feels very weak, contrary to what many, even some of my viewers, might say is the opposite.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, briefly again, since it touches back on this Golden Dome idea, about we're talking years, if not decades, of investment and research and the development and deployment ahead, right? So not in any type of immediate thing. Second of all, if you expected some big foreign policy change out of Trump administration 2.0, boy, why were you that naive? I don't understand. I really don't. Someone who bought that cockamamie, idea that there was going to be some kind of revolution in U.S. foreign policy because Trump was the president. I don't know what to say to that. Of course, it wasn't going to happen. Third of all, I'm not so sure that, at least if we're talking the specifics of building up ballistic other missile and air defense systems over your country, that is realistic, actually. I would say that's very realist. Any great power that can do it will do it, and they are doing it, right? We can quibble about where they're deploying those assets, whether they're deploying them around the world, like the U.S. has, putting THAAD assets in South Korea and missile defense assets in Romania and Poland. Okay, well, that's outside of your own country's borders. Deploying assets into space, those are becoming more controversial things. But any country that can is going to build them, right? There is not going to be some sea change in global politics that those countries that can do this are suddenly going to say, oh, we don't really need to do this anymore. Of course they are. They're going to continue to do so. That itself is realist. There's nothing really remarkable about that. The only thing is how much money is actually spent and how effective it is. That, and then how does the other great powers respond in terms of their own investment and development and deployment. So if you thought things were going to dramatically change and that the U.S. was suddenly going to stop the pursuit of primacy such as it was able to, no, it was never going to. The only thing that has happened with Trump, I think, is there is at least the tacit understanding is that the U.S. is no longer capable of taking on Russia and China and Iran and possibly other countries all at once, all at the same time, that they're no longer capable of doing that the U.S. is no longer the hype power. They're a great power among several, and they may still, in most measures, be number one, but that doesn't mean they're able to take on number two and number three at the same time and have any kind of chance of success. So it's not that the U.S. is giving up on hegemony or primacy. It's that it is increasingly trying to burden share the costs of that onto its other presumptive allies, principally in this case, Europe. That is the only big change. It's not that Trump is giving up on primacy or hegemony. In fact, his own economics ministers, right, on White House briefings on the White House website, when discussing the rationales for Trump's global tariffs plan, right, whether we're talking just the 10% or all the potential tariff war additions to that, is that the Trump administration considers the two biggest elements of U.S. hegemony to be the U.S. dollar's continued status as a reserve currency and the global U.S. military with global network of bases around the world, and that they consider both of these things they consider as global public goods, that the tariffs would force the rest of the world to pay for these things, to pay for continued U.S. hegemony and primacy. And that was part of their whole rationale with the tariffs. They recognized the pursuit of hegemony and primacy is really expensive. Therefore, we'll try to effectively tax the rest of the world. They're not going to give up on it. They're going to try to tax the rest of the world to help pay for it. And what they can't, they're going to try and shuffle part of that burden off onto their allies in Europe and, potentially elsewhere as well. That's why all these continued noises from Hegseth and others, the Europeans, you need to build, your own militaries, you need to deal with Russia. We're going to pull some troops out of Europe so that we can position them better against China effectively, right? That's what everyone acknowledges that it's really about. So it's not the end of the pursuit of hegemony and primacy. It's just taxing the world to maintain it and some burden sharing going on. Those are not revolutionary changes in my mind, right? Those are just financial measures of dealing with it.
Yeah, and perhaps your final comment on this, Mark, because what I have been, analyzing or coming to the conclusion of with regards to Trump's so-called 2.0 is that as we witness, whether it's the Golden Dome, whether it's this approach toward the Ukraine conflict, now saying gonna walk away, going to threaten Russia, going more sanctions, no, we want peace, so screw Zelensky, it's all Europe's thing now. But the entire foreign policy approach really, rather than, as you said, rather than some kind of revolution or move toward a more realist and perhaps a significant shift toward a non-interventionist posture, it seems like, similar to how I criticized the Obama administration for being a more effective evil for empire, it seems like this is kind of another iteration of this, an attempt to recalibrate in a more effective manner to continue the pursuit of empire. And I think we're seeing this on all fronts, and I'm wondering your comments on this, because that's the conclusion I'm coming to, in these so-called early stages, given that we do have a large track record, not just of Donald Trump as a president himself, but of course, this long history of how the United States operates as an empire, as an imperial power.
Sure. So, I mean, I think whether it is, on whatever level Trump is capable of understanding it, or some of the people, that there's all these problems, right? Particularly with the costs involved in the pursuit of hegemony and primacy around the world. And they attempted to shift the course, shall we say, of U.S. hegemony, of U.S. policy writ large, in order to try to course correct a bit on this, right? Not a revolution, not giving up on the pursuit of them, but a slight course correction on some things, right? But, and to some degree, Trump appears to have been trying to to clear the house, right? To take on the deep state, right? Those words, the permanent bureaucracy, the blob, as Ben Rhodes calls it, the foreign policy, security services, and military elites, whom, are not bound by electoral cycles and to the very significant degree, not to take them on, but, just to get his own people in and to properly change, to divert that course a bit. But what we see is that U.S. policy, right, and inevitably linked to the pursuit of hegemony and primacy, huge impetus involved. And changing the course of that even a bit is extremely difficult. So, however much there might be a conversation within the Trump administration, we know the Trump administration doesn't have any type of unified, coherent policy. We can identify people, for instance, in the Trump administration who want to go back to the increasing sanctions on Russia, and those who don't, right? And we see that however much it appears that Trump's instincts, right, his gut, if you will, tells him that, well, these sanctions haven't had much effect, and I don't know if I really like sanctions. I much prefer tariffs anyway, because it's a cooler word, and I love William McKinley, and he used tariffs. But that's another story. But how much pressure, how much institutional pressure inevitably falls on Trump to fall back into that path, right? And now the headlines of the New York Times are about Putin's and Russia's souring relationship. Not that they've ever really had one to begin with, and how now Trump is considering sanctions again, right? Because there is almost an inevitability to it. It's so hard to change the course of U.S. hegemony, right? You want to shift the Titanic a bit around is very hard to do. You're not going to miss the iceberg.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's definitely the case. It's I think it's just we're coming to more and more of a realization, and we haven't even touched really West Asia and the absolute disaster that is turning out to be, not just, of course, for the people of Palestine, but really regional situation where there are active and constant. I mean, there's the theater of the negotiations, and then there's the reality that it appears that no matter how much the United States is trying to avoid a conflict with Iran, everything that the United States does in that region inevitably leads up to that. So maybe final comments on this, Mark, before we head out of here.
Yeah, so I'm once again, like the Biden administration, my thoughts have always been that the Trump administration wants to avoid conflict with Iran, but their ridiculous demands that Iran gives up all nuclear enrichment and a civilian nuclear energy program, which they are entitled to by international law and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and they have to stop supporting all Shiite groups throughout the Middle East because U.S. is allowed to have proxies, but not Iran. I mean, this is all just absurd stuff that was pushed on Trump by people within his administration who understood that was helping chart the pro-Netanyahu course back to U.S. war with Iran, and the only other possibility is that this is some once again mafia style setting of ridiculously high demands going into negotiations that you're then able to back off of a little bit and claim a victory. Some kind of mafia style negotiating art of the deal tactics. But if so, it's a very dangerous way to play the diplomatic game. And I'm sure we know there are people within the Trump administration that would like to give Netanyahu what he wants, and that's war with for that war, which I don't think they are. I don't think they have the Achilles heel, once again, of the air defense interceptor missiles or even the long-range strikes. We just found out from the New York Times in the past couple of weeks that the U.S. failed even to achieve air superiority over Yemen, that an F-35 was almost shot down. And, I mean, Yemen does not have even a fraction of the air defense network that Iran has, which is not a fraction of the air defense network that Russia or China has. So, I mean, I think there are too many people within the Trump administration who don't understand the limits of military power and of particularly now the new limitations of U.S. military power relative to other regional and great powers in the world, or even Yemen, one of the poorest countries in the world. And that can lead to mistakes. We started off talking about how the Trump administration, Trump is ignorant, and him and too many people and too many political elites in Europe and the United States just don't understand, don't know things about other countries or about the use of military power and these other things. And that leads us back to, once again, the U.S. may be making, divided within itself steps in this diplomatic tensions with Iran that could lead them into a situation that they can't handle again. But Trump doesn't have a definitive course. He is relying on setting the divisions within his own administration against each other, having them both come before him and present their arguments as if to the emperor, and then he keeps choosing between one or the others, apparently without any coherent follow-up, right, on this. This leads to a divided U.S. foreign policy, divided administration, mixed signals. I mean, that's almost an understatement at this point, right, to say mixed signals. No one knows what the hell they're doing because they don't know what the hell they're doing. And they have a bad decision-making process, and they don't know even. They have a bad basis of knowledge about Russia, about Iran, about global markets, about everything that they're making this on. And when we're considering, well, they're rational actors and rationally, according to their priorities, they don't want war with Iran. Yes, I agree with all of that, but they're not rational people, and they're not dealing with proper information. And that's just something that always needs to be factored in to the dangers and our understanding and our analysis of how policy and intellectually bankrupt the U.S. and the European political elite who are making these decisions actually are.
Yeah, and to add to that, the interests that are driving this same elite that you're talking about, Mark, they're very narrow. You use the word bankrupt, and even if in this particular scenario, because we often are talking about very particular scenarios, for example, 2025 U.S.-Iran relationship, one that is marked, of course, by war, the buildup to a military conflict, economic warfare. If the interests are to weaken Iran, to essentially lead to a regime change situation, if that's always the goal from these elites, if that's the goal, then inevitably, as you said, it's not it's not really a rational thing when you think about the limits of American power, the decline of empire, the economic and military overreach, and such. But
looking for rationality.
Yeah, exactly. If that's the goal, then inevitably the inevitability is the mistake, as you call it. The mistake is actually what appears to be the trajectory anyway. So that's where the danger is, because you mentioned Yemen. We talked about just Gaza, Ukraine. No, we talk about all these like horrifically violent, incredibly just disastrous for humanity, these conflicts. That's the byproduct of this, not only this mentality, the interest that drives this mentality. But any final thoughts, Mark, before we head out of here?
No, I think our utter condemnation and despair of this flailing Western political elite, whether we're talking Trump and his crew on one hand, or the wider, shall we say, more traditionally bent hegemonic elite in the U.S. and in Europe, our utter almost frustrated acknowledgement of how incompetent they actually are, how ill-informed they actually are. That is not a reassuring thing. That it's not always good when your opponents are dumb or ill-informed, because once again, then they make potentially dangerous decisions from bad information and policy bases that can lead to all of these inevitabilities that we always talk about, like some type of military kinetic showdown in the Middle East with Iran. That no matter how many times you try to avoid it, there's only so many times you can come that close and not have it happen, right? I mean, how many times did the Biden administration were there with the Trump again? And if we look at it, how many countries in the last, or even administrations in the last few years have bombed Yemen, right? I mean, the Saudis and the Emiratis bombed Yemen. Biden bombed Yemen. Trump bombed Yemen. And I mean, none of that has actually changed the situation in Yemen at all, but it never stops them from doing the same dumb things again and again and expecting different results. How else do you explain that? It's not rational. It's not well informed. It's not learning from lessons. It's not a good decision-making process. It's enough to make you, as an analyst or a journalist, despair of the leadership that is running this shit show in the US and the rest of the West. And in a way, it casts such a golden light on the more restrained and thoughtful leadership in the supposed authoritarian states.
That's where my exactly
and Iran.
Exactly.
I don't know if they're the good guys. I don't like to speak in moralizing terms. Although when you have Trump shaking hands with the new Al-Qaeda leadership of the Islamic State that was formerly known as Syria, that's really hard not to say that is evil. That is really hard, not to put that in moral terms.
Oh, totally.
But it does, comes down, when you consider that rationality and understanding are desirable leadership qualities in all countries, right? Whether they're adversaries or not, because that leads to restraint and acknowledgement of limitations and potential damages from conflict and all of these things. Well, yeah, then it does make the leaderships of Russia and China and Iran and many other similar countries look absolutely heads and shoulders qualitatively above the rest. And maybe it's only that has already kept us from some type of more catastrophic conflict from already World War III style already occurring.
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. I would definitely say that when I was just in China, when you just everyone understands the militarization, the provocations, how many times the United States has threatened war, builds up around its borders, and yet it's the China side, similar to Russia, similar to Iran. It's the other side that's saying, no, we don't want to pursue that because that's going to destroy everything anyway. And so, yeah, it's exactly as you said, Mark. It's only this restraint, which is coupled with, I think, where the hope lies is the development of a new world order that is showing benefits to especially underdeveloped countries. We just had, when I was talking to Pepe Escobar, we talked about the Indonesian president talking at the ASEAN GCC summit about, China standing with the oppressed. And you have Russia, of course, talking about building bigger ties with Africa, Latin America. I think it's this kind of interconnectivity where we're seeing the hope. But of course, it is coming amid where I think the despair is this hyper desperate, empire that's falling apart, that is literally trying to destroy everything, including, if we look at what's happening in Gaza, that's the, I think that's the kind of the, where we can put the magnifying glass and see, yeah, that's the model that the entirety of the empire is pursuing, really.
It's like a room full of relatively enlightened and responsible adults. And in the middle of that room, there's one crazy young male, emotionally unbalanced teenager and his small gang
with
who has
disorder.
A gun. And maybe that gun he's fired off a few of those rounds wildly, and he may have less bullets than he had originally. But the rest of the room is trying to talk this crazy little down. That is, unfortunately where we are to create an analogous picture of world affairs right now. Unfortunately, young men with guns often do stupid things.
Well, Mark, we can head out of here. I want to acknowledge all of the super chats. Thank you. It's very much appreciated on this first live stream back. We will head out together. I want to also appreciate, Flying Boar had a lot of questions, one of which for you, Mark, was why doesn't Russia target drone factories? So I'll just throw that out to you, Mark.
They just
and
did.
We will head out
They
to you
just,
after
they
that.
just,
Yeah.
First of all, the Kiev regime now has a couple hundred, several hundred, right? Possibly as much as 500 distributed, artisanal, small, underground, mostly literally underground drone workshops where they'll have like 10 or 20 people assembling drones 24/7 essentially. And whenever Russia can find them, it does. And it just found one of the bigger ones in Antonov, and then it pounded it with 20 Garans and several other missiles on top of that this weekend. So when they can find them, they are hitting them. That's the, I can only tell you that there were the West, I forget exactly which, it was either the Times or the Economist specifically mentioned that Russia is getting better and achieving more results hunting down the Kiev regime's drone production in the past month or two. So they're doing what they can, and they're getting some results, enough that the Western media is increasingly acknowledging it and complaining about it. So I hope that answers the question to the best that I'm able to.
Yeah.
Good question.
Well, there's many. Flying Boar asked many, but we will head out of here. Please do bring your questions back, Flying Boar, because Mark will be back on this program again very soon, hopefully. Everyone, take good care. We will head out of here. I'll be back later in the week. I will announce that on YouTube community and various other channels. So be sure you're subscribed here and hit that notifications bell so you get the notifications. Everyone go to the video description. You can find Mark Sleboda's Substack there, where you can follow all of his interviews and all of his work that he is doing. Please hit the like button as you leave here. That helps keep the stream going as the video seeps into YouTube's algorithm. And then, of course, subscribe in any way possible. You can support this channel on Patreon, Substack, and much more. Without further ado, it's been a great show. First one back, and there will be many more to come. Take care and have a good one. Bye-bye.